talk about starting solids, raising an adventurous eater. As was mentioned, I am a registered dietitian and lactation specialist with Happy Family. I'm also a mom of 3. I have a 7-year-old and 5-year-old twins. And so it feels like starting solids was a lifetime ago and also just yesterday. And so today I'm going to share my top tips for starting solids and how that then translates into raising an adventurous, raising a healthy and adventurous eater. And so you may be tuning in if you're pregnant or you have a new baby, and are curious about those next steps of starting solids, or maybe you're kind of at that starting solid phase and you're wondering how to progress. So we're going to talk about all of it. Some of you might also have toddlers and you're wondering, is it too late to improve picky eating behaviors among toddlers? The answer is it's not too late, and I'm going to get into that too. Starting solids is a really exciting time for you and your baby. It is a huge milestone. When you think of it, your baby is on a liquid diet for the first several months of their lives. And so then you go from switching to that to solids. It can be really overwhelming for moms and parents and caregivers. Research shows that it's most beneficial to start introducing solids. And when I say solids, I'm talking about, purees, anything that's not milk. Most beneficial to start closer to that 6-month mark and never before 4 months of age. And this is because at closer to 6 months of age, your baby's intestines are mostly developed. And some doctors might be okay with you starting at or around 4 months of age. But the longer you wait, the better the outcome can be. And it also prevents the risk of choking because you're introducing a new texture to a very young baby. And so, also importantly is looking at, is your baby developmentally ready? I was just talking to a mom yesterday and she said, my baby is about 6 months. And I said, well, let's look at, those markers, like being able to sit up mostly unassisted, having good head and neck control so the baby's not kind of flopping over when you're introducing solids. So your baby could be 6 months old and not really have good head and neck control. And so maybe it's not the exact right time. There is no specific calendar date that is crucial. So we just say around 6 months of age, but looking at your individual baby to really know what the next step is with starting solids. So we like to say the phrase under 1 just for fun. So remember that phrase when starting solids. And what we mean by that is that starting solids, around 6 months of age, the primary goal is exposure to new flavors, to new textures, to get your baby used to taking in food, from a spoon or from their fingers, and then eventually advancing textures and doing their own self-feeding. So that is the goal rather than the calories. Breast milk or formula, whatever, source of milk is the main source of calories and nutrition under the age of 1. So we don't even want to see that decrease. And one thing I get a lot with parents is, my baby is not gaining weight well, so my doctor said introduce solids. Well, if you compare ounce for ounce, breast milk or formula, nutrient-wise, to a couple tablespoons of pureed pears, the milk is much more nutrient dense. And so we don't want to be filling up tiny tummies with a few tablespoons of purees in an effort to gain weight. The important thing is why is baby maybe not gaining weight appropriately, or diving deeper into that. So all this to say that, that 6 to 12 month age range, it's more just like for practice. I call it like a runway to get your baby to the place that after their first birthday, they're eating, regular foods and what the family is eating in appropriate textures. So we don't want to be so stressed if a baby is only taking a little bit at a time. So there's lots of different ways of introducing solids. The method that I'm going to be referring to, and the most popular one, is providing food in a mashed or pureed form and then advancing the texture. So initially it should be a pretty thin, smooth puree. You're taking a fruit, a vegetable, a cereal, and mixing it with breast milk or formula to get a nice smooth consistency, and then advancing from there. You can start with fruits, you can start with vegetables, cereals, grains. There is no first food requirement. The old school of thought was, starting with rice cereal or even just an oat cereal, but that's not a requirement. So you could start with a fruit, a vegetable, a cereal. If baby is 6 months of age, a protein, even like a pureed meat or bean is fine when they're starting solids, as long as it's in a texture that baby can handle. And a lot of moms ask, what order should I introduce the food in? And that doesn't matter either. There's a lot of thought that, if I hold off on fruit because fruit is sweet, then my baby won't have a preference for sweet food. So if I introduce vegetables first, will my baby, eat more vegetables? Unfortunately, no. Humans in general have a preference for sweet foods. That's just biologically hardwired in our DNA. And so if you introduce pears before broccoli or broccoli before pears, it's really not going to make that much of a difference. So any order is fine. And there's always the question, should I be doing my own food or buying prepared food? And again, that's a preference as well. So totally up to the parent what they're capable of. You want to aim to feed in the beginning once or twice a day, about 1 to 2 tablespoons at a time. And then as baby gets used to that, you're going to be feeding 2 to 3 times a day, 2 to 4 tablespoons at a time. It's really not that much food. I mean, there's fewer than 4 tablespoons. I'm sorry, there's more than 4 tablespoons of baby food in a jar or a pouch. But this is just to give parents the information that it's not a lot of food that babies eat at this age. Some might eat more than 4 tablespoons in a sitting, and some might eat less. And it can be alarming because as adults, we're used to adult-sized portions. But your baby might only take in a few tablespoons at a time. They might wind up having more food on their face or on their tray or in their hair. Again, you want to just remember, under 1, just for fun. We're doing this for exposure, to get baby in the high chair, get that, feeding experience with mom or dad or the caregiver, and the exposure to different flavors and textures. And research shows that providing a wide variety of foods now when you're starting solids is a really good way to get them to have a broader palate as they get older. So the more exposure that happens now in the early stages, the better eaters they might be as they get older. It doesn't mean they're going to love broccoli when they're 2, but they're going to be more likely to try something that they've tried in this infant stage. And then you always want to be sure to introduce your solids after milk. So let's say you're starting with breakfast. You want to make sure that your baby is waking up, you're providing breast or bottle milk, and then maybe 30 to 60 minutes later, you're introducing the solids. You don't want to do the solids before the milk because the solids can fill that tiny tummy up and make them less likely to drink all their milk. And again, we want that to be the primary source of calories and nutrition. So it winds up feeling like an all-day feeding frenzy because you're doing milk, food, kind of just evenly spaced out throughout the day. So it is a bit of feeding in the beginning as they get into more of a pattern. And then once your baby is used to purees, it's time to advance in terms of textures and flavor combinations. And actually, I should go back and say that when you are introducing a food one at a time, you do want to wait 2 to 3 days before you introduce another food. So let's say you start with avocado, wait 2 or 3 days of just giving avocado before you introduce pureed pears to make sure your baby does not have an allergic reaction. And then once you start this repertoire, you've got, 4, 5, 6 different foods that your baby has tried and is fine with, you can start combining them. And speaking of avocado, everyone always asks, what's the first food that I should give? Again, there is no first food you have to give, but I actually always did with all 3 of my kids. I preferred to do avocado because it's so convenient. You just take a ripe avocado and take a fork and whisk it with some milk and it's ready to go. So it really doesn't take much prep. You don't have to bake or steam or anything like that. So as your baby is getting used to that puree texture, then you can start advancing. So then you can start making foods a little bit thicker, a little bit lumpier, a little bit chunkier. So they start to get used to that texture and kind of have to manipulate it in their mouth a little bit. And then, within a couple weeks, a couple months, you can start providing pea-size or smaller little bits of food. So things that I always love would be like shredded cheese or, chopped up cooked beans or something like that, fork mashed whole grain pasta. So things that baby can start learning how to self-feed, because that's a really important milestone as well. You want to make sure that the food I said is pea-size or smaller and smushable between the fingers. So you're not going to give little chunks of raw carrot or celery or cucumber. It needs to be smushable, so there's less risk of choking. And so they can really practice with self-feeding. You can even, dip spoons into food and let baby try to get the spoon to their mouth. It's not always going to get there. You're going to get a lot of food all over. It's a very messy stage. But this practice of getting the food, close to their mouth is really, really important for their development. It can be really frustrating for a parent when a baby doesn't seem interested in solids or they're pushing the food out with their tongue. They're not they're getting distracted, they're getting fussy. If you do notice they're pushing that food out with their tongue, that tongue thrust motion is a developmental stage that we also want to look out for. So that could just indicate they're not ready. And so sometimes, like I said before, you might be at that 6-month mark and baby just isn't ready. They're just not into it. And we know babies change so much in these early weeks and months that it could be just another week before baby's ready, or another couple of weeks that you kind of take a break and start again. So it's really important that we're not forcing and, coaxing and really trying to get baby to be eating if they don't seem to be into it or developmentally ready just yet. Excuse me. And babies can really sense our frustration when it comes to feeding. So if we're getting frustrated, then they get frustrated, and it becomes this really just frustrating time that they don't want to be in the high chair, and we don't want to be doing it. So again, we want to just take a breath and really follow baby's cues as much as possible. The more we can establish this positive feeding environment now, it's just so important as they get older. And as I get into that toddler feeding, you'll see how important that positive feeding relationship is. If you are concerned that baby's not getting enough, or they're not, manipulating the food properly, or they're really not getting the hang of self-feeding, chat with your pediatrician. Sometimes there is a need for things like feeding therapy, occupational therapy, and that's totally fine. So it's definitely a good idea to be in touch with the pediatrician. Also, if there aren't any food allergies in your immediate family, then you can start introducing those, typical allergenic foods, the peanuts, soy, eggs at 6 months of age, as long as it is texture appropriate. So, a lot of parents wonder, should I be holding off on, nuts and peanut butter, ingredients, or should I be introducing it? So 6 months of age is an appropriate time to do so. And there's lots of different ways and we're not going to dive into it now, but there's lots of different ways to introduce things like peanut butter and nuts. And of course, things like eggs and soy and dairy in a safe way for baby. Many parents are also interested in baby-led weaning, which is a different sort of form of starting solids. And it basically bypasses that puree stage and goes right into baby self-feeding. And so I'm not going to get into it in this talk, but just because a lot of parents are interested in it before they start solids, 2 fantastic resources that I want to share is a dietitian, Katie Ferraro. She is kind of the guru when it comes to baby-led weaning. She's got a lot of courses and resources. And there's a book called Born to Eat, which is another book written by a dietitian. And the focus is on baby-led weaning. So anyone who's interested in potentially looking into that, there's some good resources. At around 6 months of age, you can also start introducing water in a sippy or straw cup. Again, this is more for developmental reasons than it is for hydration. Baby is getting all the hydration they need from the milk and the foods that you're providing. But ultimately, we want them to be able to know how to drink out of a cup with a straw or a sippy cup, even an open cup, which sounds messy, and it is, but is totally doable for babies starting at 6 months. Only about half a cup, which is 4 ounces of water, is recommended, between 6 and 12 months. At 12 months of age, that could be increased to about a cup a day. But again, if baby is having milk, they're getting their hydration from that. Water and milk are the only beverages really needed at this age. And the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no juice under the age of 1. So that kind of wraps up the first section of starting solids and what that looks like. And before I dive into the next stage, which is, getting into the crux of raising these adventurous eaters, I'm just going to scan to see, or if anyone can pop on and tell me if there's any questions so far. I'll just wait a second to see if there's any questions so far on what I talked about already, or we can just
Janel, we lots of questions, Janel. So
okay, let's hit some now, and then I can do the rest later.
Perfect. So let me scroll up here. There were questions about, and Eleanor has been responding to some of them, I see, from Happy Family. So thank you. But there were questions about how much formula or breast milk should you mix with fruit or vegetable as you're just starting out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's really as much as it takes to get the appropriate texture. And it might only be a few teaspoons or tablespoons at a time. And parents shouldn't then take that into account when how much should I put in the baby's bottle? So for example, if you put 2 tablespoons of formula to mash your potatoes for your baby, you don't have to then say, oh, should I delete 2 tablespoons of formula from the baby's bottle. I hope that makes sense. It's really just looking at the consistency. And I always found it helpful when I was feeding my first. A lot of the food I chose to make myself, but I would look at, I would buy a jar from the store and kind of test it out. And then I could see the texture that was appropriate for that age. And then just trying to mimic it, when I'm mashing up my avocado or throwing something in the blender. But it really should not take that much if you're taking something like, steamed fruits or vegetables that already have some liquid.
Yeah. A couple people are asking about allergies. Some of our moms and dads said, they have shellfish allergies. My wife doesn't. I'm scared for my kids to try fish. And this could apply probably to nut allergies and other things that could or could not be hereditary. So what is your take on that, and what's recommended in terms of being conscious of that if you do have allergy issues that run in your family?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so like I said, the recommendation if you don't have allergies in your immediate family is start introducing them. And frankly, that does not clear a baby from having their own allergies anyway. It would just be wise to check in with your pediatrician if you or your partner has, one of these main allergies, and just discuss the best practices for introducing them. It really is the same. You might just have a closer eye if you're introducing something with shellfish and that there's a shellfish allergy in your family, you're really going to watch closer probably for an allergic reaction. But discussing that with your pediatrician to really know and understand what the potential reaction could look like is important.
And this is another great question from Shafina. What tips do you have if baby is gagging from solids that are been by 12 months? So maybe chunkier textures, or starting to give those little bits of food.
Yeah. Well, so this is, I'm going to get into like the more advanced textures, but it's scary, right? Advancing textures is a scary thing because we do start running the risk of potential gagging and choking. It really is important to kind of learn the difference between gagging and choking. Gagging is, it looks scary because the baby is making a very strong facial expression, but it is just the baby's way of kind of manipulating that texture and swallowing it and trying to figure out what to do with it in their mouth and in their throat. Choking is very different. That's going to be, restriction of airflow. But if you're finding that at 12 months, that baby is really not kind of chewing and manipulating that food, and there's a lot of gagging going on, it might be worth it to check in with a feeding therapist and see what's going on. Because ideally at babies, around baby's first birthday, it doesn't have to be on their first birthday, but the goal, like I said, is that runway of gearing them up to being able to eat food that the rest of the family is eating, as long as the texture is appropriate by their first birthday. So hopefully we're seeing that baby can kind of chew and swallow that food a bit. So a feeding therapist could never hurt.
Great. Okay, so do you want to get into some of the more advanced textures and I guess more advanced eating strategies?
Yes, let's do it. And I just realized I forgot to make one note. It reminded me when I talked about facial expressions that when starting solids, you are probably going to notice that your baby makes these funny facial expressions, and sometimes it looks like they hate the food. They're wincing. They're just like spitting, turning their head. Well, if they're turning their head away, that's a sign that they don't want anymore. But the facial expression is not something that we should pay attention to, because a lot of moms are like, I fed my baby peas and he hated it. It is not that they hate it. It is that we are providing a brand new food and a brand new texture, and it is just new to them. It's just, that's how they're reacting. It's kind of alarming more than it, there's no such thing as a picky baby when you're introducing new foods. So the goal is to just keep providing in different ways and different forms. And as baby gets older and you can provide foods in different textures and different ways, you might find that baby enjoys those peas when they're with sweet potatoes, or when baby can self-feed peas versus pureed peas. So really try to not focus on that facial expression and just keep providing different foods in a variety of ways. And this is going to translate into the kind of picky eating behaviors I'm going to talk about now. So that starting solid phase goes really fast, right? 6 to 12 months. That's the runway that we're getting up to, around their first birthday. So just when you think you get the hang of solids, it kind of changes. Everything with babies changes, but the feeding changes quite a bit. So food neophobia, or fear of new foods, kicks in around that 2 years of age, sometimes earlier, sometimes 15, 18 months. But it's pretty typical that parents will notice a shift in their baby's eating habits. Things that they were eating just fine and dandy for the past 6 to 12 months, they're suddenly refusing, turning their head away from. Their appetite seems to have changed. And this is super normal. So we want to chat about healthy feeding practices to help prevent picky eating behaviors and raise lifelong eaters. And so I really want to stress that I promote more healthy feeding than I do healthy eating, because you could have a baby that eats all the broccoli and kale in the world, but if you're not feeding in a more holistic way, if you're forcing that baby to eat broccoli, it's not really that healthy. So I like to focus on the feeding practices, this whole, approach with how we're feeding our children, less on what we're feeding our children. And also it is typical for appetites to change, just like ours does as well. If a baby is teething, if they're learning how to crawl or walk, other developmental milestones, sleep regressions, a cold, something like that, jet lag, if you're traveling, all of these can affect our baby's appetite. And so it's really just so normal for everything to be abnormal, for like a month to go by and everything is going swimmingly, and then your baby's appetite changes, or they suddenly don't like a certain food. So just kind of taking it all in stride, that these changes are very, very normal. It just keeps us on our toes as parents. But if we cater to picky eating habits now, it really only gets worse. So I know how hard it is to have toddlers in your house. So it's a lot of work. And so it can be very easy to cater to picky eating habits, but now is the time that we really want to buckle down and promote these healthy feeding habits. So I want to introduce you to what I consider the golden rule of feeding. And it's a term coined by the dietitian Ellen Satter. It's called the division of responsibility. And the phrase is that parents are responsible for the what, where, and when of feeding, and children are responsible for the how much and whether of eating. So to break that down, parents are responsible for what food is brought into the house, right? We're doing the grocery shopping and the meal prep and deciding what's for meals, when the meals are being served, where we're eating the meals, and that's it. That's where we draw the line. Our children are responsible, even little toddlers are responsible for how much food they're going to eat of that food that we have provided, whether or not they're going to eat it at all. Okay. And that can be terrifying for parents, because they say, well, if I just let my kid eat whatever he wanted, he's only going to eat the bread on the plate. He's only going to eat the pasta. And so I'm going to get into that a bit. We don't control the eating. We optimize the feeding. So that feeding environment, our approach to feeding is so crucial. So we're choosing the food. We as grown-ups get to determine what a healthy, balanced meal or snack looks like, when it's happening, what time of day, and that's it. So kids know, or they don't know how to choose balanced meals, but they do know if they like a food, if they like the way it tastes on any given day. Again, that can change from day to day. And they do know how hungry or satisfied they are. We don't know how hungry or satisfied anyone is, because it's personal, it's subjective. So really recognizing that our older babies and our toddlers, they can self-regulate. They know how much food they want or need to feel satisfied. And growth and appetite typically slows down around 2 years of age. And so this is when we're going to see a child who maybe ate everything, they're suddenly slowing down. I remember this with my firstborn. At 18 months, he was eating almost the same size meals that I was eating, 3 meals a day. He would have like a sandwich for a snack. He was just growing rapidly, and around his second birthday, it dramatically slowed down. I noticed he wasn't eating as much as meals, and so I really had to curb the mid-meal snacks to adjust, because, like I said, babies change frequently, but their growth does slow down as they approach that second birthday. So they don't need as much food. So a lot of parents will kind of freak out and say, my baby's not eating it, or my toddler's not eating as much, and that's also very normal. And they know, the toddler knows, they're just not as hungry. And so it's a really challenging thing as parents to honor their hunger, their satiety, their taste buds, and kind of let the baby, or rather the toddler, kind of dictate to us what they need to feel satisfied. So when we coax or when we bribe or try to force one more bite, it just has negative outcomes. It shows our kids that we don't trust their bodies. We don't trust their own inner wisdom to know how hungry or satisfied they are, and that we know they should be eating more. We know they should try one more bite. And I also work with a lot of adults, And I see these habits ingrained in them from childhood, that they feel like they have to finish what's on their plate, or they don't have they're not tuned into their own hunger and satiety cues, because as a kid, maybe they were part of the clean plate club where they had to finish everything on their plate. So we don't want to do that. We want to really tune into our child's inner wisdom. And I like to give the analogy of a restaurant. Imagine if you were at a restaurant and you ask the server, you say, I'm done with my meal. I'd like to see the dessert menu. And the server says, well, you haven't finished your vegetables and you've barely eaten your salmon. I'm not giving you your dessert menu until you finish what's on your plate. You would walk out of there. You would be just so furious that some server thinks that he or she knows what's going on in your body, when really you just didn't want to eat too much because your favorite chocolate cake was on the dessert menu and you wanted to save room for that. And so it's kind of similar with little ones, when we're saying you've barely eaten, or you have to try that, or you always like, the potatoes, why aren't you eating them today? We really just kind of have to take a deep breath and swallow the words that we want to say and just honor their hunger and satiety. Remember, we're the gatekeepers, so we get to choose what foods are in the house. A lot of times I hear from parents, my child will only eat ... or my child will never eat ... So it is important, if you're one of those parents that says, my child will only eat mac and cheese. Well, the mac and cheese is somehow getting from the store to the plate. So working through that, mac and cheese is fine, but if we're providing other things and kind of working through all the stuff I'm going to talk about, we can break free from that, traditional picky eating kid food menu. So we're in charge of the food that comes in the house, and we're in charge of what goes on the plate, and then the child decides if they're going to eat it. So we want to just keep offering a wide variety of foods, just like we do when we're starting solids, really expand their palate. I like to say that exposure is the bridge from not eating something to eating something. And my favorite example to give is that I love broccoli. And so probably once a week, I'll make a dish with broccoli or a side dish with broccoli. And with my firstborn, I did that. There was always probably once a week broccoli of some form on his plate, and I would just put a tiny amount because, again, they don't have big appetites. And he never touched it. He didn't touch it, but I didn't talk about it. I didn't force it. I didn't bribe it. I didn't hide it. And he just didn't eat it. So there was some wasted broccoli for about 5 years. And then one day, another day that there was broccoli on my, dinner menu, and he ate it. And then he asked for more. And I wanted to cry tears of joy and jump up and down, but I restrained myself because we don't want them to eat things just because it makes us happy. We want them to eat things because they like eating it. But I couldn't believe it. That never would have happened if I wasn't continuously putting broccoli on the plate as if it was that's just part of what we do. And so that was me providing and him deciding. So I provided it, it was there. And if he chose that he didn't want it, well, that's fine. Sometimes I go to a party or a buffet and there's food that I don't want to try either. But without that exposure, he never would have had the ability to pick it up. So when we say like, oh, my kid will never eat broccoli, well, they won't until they will, right? So having that exposure is super important, and just not stressing, not saying you have to try it or, we can't waste that. It's just, the food is there, and you
love
can
that, Janel. We have done the same thing in my family. We continue to offer it, and a lot of times it does go untouched. This is for my middle, and he's 3, and we just continue to give it on the plate. And because I kind of learned with my first offering, and eventually, they say, "Oh, I love that." Like my first loves salad now. He loves salad. He asks for salad all the time. That was something that he never really wanted, but we started to just kind of put a little on his plate, and then he tried it, So much great information. That was just jam-packed, filled with just lots of great little nuggets there for moms and dads to think about as they start this journey. And I love what you said about really making it fun and making it as stress-free as possible on all of us. I think that's so important.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. I just scanned through to see if there are any questions we didn't get through. I think of them in what you described, but if anyone does have anything they'd like to ask Janel before we wrap up to our next topic, please let us know.
I just want to put a little plug about desserts, because I didn't get a chance to talk about that, but people always have questions, and every family has different dessert philosophies. Some eat it every day, some special occasions. However you do it, you want to do a no strings attached approach. That dessert is, again, something that you as the food gatekeeper decided to have in the house, and it can be part of a meal, and the child doesn't have to eat or not eat anything in order to get it. So we don't want things like food rewards or rewards for eating. We want our children to be eating things, whether it's dessert or the salad on the plate, because they want to eat it, not because there's a bribe or because it makes mom happy. That there's just internal reasons. And if we can just foster these that intuition when it comes to eating with our toddlers, that's how we raise healthy eaters. So it is a long game, and it's not a meal to meal. Oh, they haven't eaten a vegetable today. It is the approaches that we do now help build them up as healthy eaters for life.
So true. A quick question that I think is a great one from Valeria. What do you do with the toddler running around when eating? Some kids just don't want to stay in their high chairs. They're itching to get out. That can be a challenge. So what's your advice there?
Two things. I would say just kind of monitor the meal. Like, we can't have high expectations with a little one sitting at the table as long as we do. It might only be that they sit for 5 minutes, and when they start getting fidgety, the meal is over for them, and we kind of free them from that and let them go. The other thing, and this is something I'm just passionate about learning about, it's more of an occupational therapy type of thing, but seating is really important. So when you picture your kitchen tables or your dining room tables, it almost feels like, if you put a little 2-year-old in them, their knees don't bend. They can't, like, the table is like at their eye level versus like this. It's so challenging for them to be comfortable. They're fidgeting, they're on their bums, they're on one leg, they're moving about. And so there are actually higher chairs. Actually, IKEA has some really great higher chairs that brings them up to the dining height. There's a little rung for their feet to rest on. That's important, is having their feet touch the ground. That's really important for babies too. Sitting in high chairs gives them more security. So it could be a matter of changing your toddler's seating arrangement. That makes a world of a difference with fidgety behavior. So timing and fidgeting. And also, if you're having structured meal and snack times and the toddler's not grazing, it helps ensure that they're ready for a meal, that they're hungry for a meal. When you have a toddler that's snacking and eating in the stroller and eating in the car, and then they get to mealtime, they're not even hungry, they're going to be fidgety.
So much good information. Don't forget to join Happy Family in. That is at 11:15 and 2:15. They'll be in their booth to learn all about the brands and products, and we'll have those breaks built in. We'll let you know when those are happening. But thank you so much, Janel, for all of this information. There's also a great giveaway happening in the Happy Family booth, so if you guys haven't checked that out, please do so. Thanks, Janel.
Bye. Thank you.
All righty. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, so that was